3, verse 15. 1 Chronicles 3, verse 15. We'll get there in just a minute. First, a pop quiz. Who is now the monarch in England? It's not a trick question. Yeah, y'all don't care any more than I do. Charles III. How did he get that job? Huh? His mom died, but how did he get that job? He was born into it. He was the firstborn son. And the way things work in England and in many other countries, the firstborn, and in some countries they let a woman become the queen even if there is a male offspring, but in a lot it is the firstborn male child. In the case of Queen Elizabeth, Charles was the firstborn child and he was male. But what we're going to look at right now in Chronicles 3:15 are the sons of Josiah were Johanan, the firstborn. The second was Jehoiakim, and he has another name, we'll probably see that. The third was Zedekiah, and the fourth was Shallum. He also has another name, which we will see tonight. What do you know about Johanan? Butch? Well, this is the only time his name is mentioned, so that's all you could know. We don't know anything about him. There are some speculation, and that's all it is, that perhaps he died in the same battle that killed Josiah, that he was there fighting. But that is all it is speculation. I even went back and looked at some secular versions, some secular references, Jewish Encyclopedia and another, and it's just like he doesn't exist. And therefore the thought is that he did die before his father, or died with his father. Notice the second born then is Jehoiakim, but he's not the first king after Josiah. The first king after Josiah is Shallum, although his name that we're going to see, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, is Jehoahaz, will become the first king after his father dies. Now, I promised myself and maybe some others I was not going to redo all of Todd's lessons on Josiah. But again, pop quiz number 2. When we read about Josiah's reforms that he did, remember he came after 55 years of Manasseh. And Manasseh's reign on the whole was bad. Now we know what we read about Manasseh repenting toward the end of his life, but he wasn't able to undo all the damage he had done. Then Josiah's father Amnon served for 2 years, and then Josiah took over for 31 years. Started at age 8, so his reign lasted until he was 39 or 40 years old. Pop quiz. What are some of the good things that Josiah did that would have laid a great foundation for a king to follow him? I've got 5 jotted down, but you all were here for Todd's lessons. I know you were taking notes and listening. Show him how good you were listening. What were some of the 5 things, and if you've got a 6th one, that's fine, but that happened during Josiah's reign that laid a great foundation for his followers?
To summarize, he wiped out all of the idolatrous worship places and in many instances killed those that were involved directly in that worship.
That's number 1. He destroyed the high places of worship, and Mark's right. He also killed some of the pagan priests that they had. Okay, that's 1. What else did he do? He read the law. That's the 4th thing. We'll get to that in just a moment. After he destroyed the high places, just imagine what the temple looked like while they were doing, or while the people were not paying attention to the temple, but were paying attention to the other places. He started a restoration of the temple. Not only the physical grounds to spruce it up, new flowers and stuff like that, but he also purged the temple of worship practices that were not authorized, that had crept in to what was supposed to be God's place of worship, some of the things on the outside had started creeping in, and he purged them of that. And then Mary said he read the word of the law to the people. That's because as they were doing the renovations of the temple, they found it. Think about that for a minute. We have, how many, you don't have to answer out loud, how many Bibles do you have at home? I got a few. Several different translations, or not King James translation, I guess. These people had not heard the word of the law in a long time. And you remember what they did when they heard it? They stood and they listened to it being read to them. And then the final thing, Mark and I were talking about this before class. I want to see if anybody else gets it, because he will. What's the fifth thing that you can think of that Josiah did that laid a great foundation for those that came after him? All right, Todd, you can take this one. He reinstituted the Passover. It had been a long time. That's what Mark and I were talking about. How long had it been since the Passover had been celebrated the way it was supposed to be celebrated? And he even invited those of a Jewish background from the northern kingdom to come down to Judah to join them. It wasn't real easy traveling from the northern kingdom to the southern kingdom at that point. There was a little Assyrian problem in the north. Back up way before this, for those of you that don't remember, around 720, 722 BC, the Assyrians invaded the northern kingdom and conquered it. And they were on the march to the southern kingdom when something really weird happened to their army. You remember what it was? Well, he said 180,000 got killed by an angel. The way I always said is 180,000 woke up dead. They went to sleep and they didn't wake up. And about that time, the Assyrian commander didn't have either the forces he thought he needed or decided it was bad luck to go against Judah, and he went home. But part of the Assyrian method of doing things was that, and I'll use the United States as an example so we can kind of visualize it. If they came in and conquered the old Confederacy, then what they would do is they'd take some people from Georgia and they'd drop them off in Kentucky, and they'd take some people from Mississippi and put them in Florida, and take some people from Alabama and stick them in Texas. They were mixing and matching so that the people didn't have a common language and they didn't have the drive, so to speak, to assemble themselves to fight against the Assyrians. It was safer for them if the folks were not united. As a result, when they dropped off the bunch in the northern kingdom and took a bunch away, what you had in the north became what is referred to in the New Testament as Samaria. And probably not a politically correct term, but they were half-breeds. At least that's how they were viewed by the folks around Jerusalem. And they were not well thought of. You remember the tale of the Good Samaritan? One of the points, the reason that is so striking, is that a Samaritan helped who was believed to be a Jew. And that just wasn't the way things worked back then. But anyway, those that could come down into Judea did. And they celebrated the Passover. So, turn, if you would, to Jeremiah chapter 3. We're going to be in Jeremiah a lot. We're also going to be in 2 Kings and some in Chronicles. But to show you how long Jeremiah was on the job as prophet, Jeremiah 3, verse 6. Jeremiah 3, verse 6. I'll give you a minute to get there. Then the Lord said to me in the days of Josiah the king. Now, this is when things were going good, remember? Jeremiah started becoming a prophet around the 13th year, I believe, of Jeremiah's reign. And he said, have you seen what faithless Israel did? And when he says Israel, he's talking about the northern kingdom here. She went up on every high hill and under every tree, and she was a harlot there. I thought, after all these things after she has done all these things, she will return to me. But she did not return. And her treacherous sister Judah saw it. And I saw all the adulteries of the faithless Israel. I sent her away, and I had sent her away and given her a writ of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but she went and was a harlot also. He's talking about Judah during the time of Josiah doing all these reforms. And I kind of get the picture that the folks who were going along with this public worship and the tearing down of the worship places and standing there listening to the law being read were doing it because the king told them to. Not so much because they said, hey, this is a great idea. Now, some did. I'm not painting the entire group with a broad brush, but you just get the idea from what Jeremiah is saying here, and if you read on, it doesn't get better, that the southern kingdom, Judah, did not learn the lesson of the northern kingdom being wiped out the face of the earth by the Assyrians because God allowed it to happen. You see, that 180,000 that died in their sleep could have died before the northern kingdom was taken. But God had had it with them. He had had it with their harlotry, with their spiritual adultery that they were committing. Okay, let's get into the first king. First king is Jehoahaz. If you'll turn to 2 Kings 23. We're going to read what's reported there. The Chronicles here do not tell us anything really of different or of more value than what we're going to read here. 2 Kings 23, starting in verse 30. Actually, we're going to back up to 28. The rest of the acts of Josiah and all he did, are they not written in the book of Chronicles, the kings of Judah? In his day, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, went up to the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates, and King Josiah went to meet him, and when Pharaoh Necho saw him, he killed him at Megiddo. In very few words, it's telling you that the Egyptian king, again, I will use the United States so you can think of it this way. We're in Arkansas. That's where Josiah is in God's country, Arkansas. The Egyptians are in Texas, and they're wanting to attack Illinois. What's the easiest way to get there? Well, you could go up through Oklahoma and cut across Kansas, but you could also just go right across Arkansas. And if you know the terrain there, the best way to get, in this instance, from Egypt to where they're going to fight the Babylonians is to go right through Judah. And what happened, and I think this is in Chronicles, what happened was the Egyptian Pharaoh sent message to Josiah and said, we're not here to fight you. Yeah, we've got a big army, but we're just going to be passing through. You don't have to worry about us. Josiah worried about them. And some have speculated, again, this is in some of the secular histories, that Josiah may have already made an alliance or an agreement with the Babylonians to defend that border so the Egyptians could not come up. Again, not in the Bible, but that's what some historians have thought. Well, Josiah went to meeting, and it wasn't, hi, how you doing meeting? It was a battle, and Josiah was killed. His servants drove his body, verse 30, in a chariot from Megiddo, and brought him to Jerusalem and buried him in his own tomb. Then the people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, and anointed him and made him king in place of his father. Now you remember when we looked in 1 Chronicles 3, there was no Jehoahaz mentioned. I told you his name was Shallum. And we get that out of Jeremiah 22. We'll look at that in just a little bit. Doesn't say a whole lot about him. Starting in verse 31, he was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. That means if he got the job now, he'd be out by January. And his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah, but that's not the Jeremiah the prophet. And I have never really understood verse 32. He did evil in the sight of the Lord according to all his fathers had done. He was only there 90 days. How much bad could he do? Enough that the writer of the book of Kings made sure to mention it. It is not mentioned in Chronicles that he did evil in the sight of the Lord, but the writer of Kings sure did mention it. So whatever he did in that time, he made the most of it. Now, notice what verse 30 says again. The people of the land took him and made him king. We've already seen they had three choices as far as sons of Josiah are concerned. They didn't want Jehoiakim, and they passed by Zedekiah. They went for the youngest one. The Jewish history that I read said that it was probably, and they were saying probable, because Josiah had designated him as the best of the bad options. Think back to David. When David was dying, who was his oldest son? No, Absalom had already died. Absalom already did his rebellion and died at that point. I'm asking a question I don't remember the answer to. It wasn't Solomon, I know that. Solomon was much younger. Starts with an A, whatever the son's name was. What? That may be it, and that may be why I don't remember it, because I can't pronounce it. But whoever it was, he got passed over, and he was not very happy about it. And he tried to undercut Solomon, and Solomon was able to outsmart him. We see some of the same thing going on here, because in just a moment we're going to see that Jehoiakim gets his throne after all. Verse 33 tells us that Pharaoh Necho imprisoned him, that's Jehoahaz, at Riblah in the land of Hamath, which I looked on the map. That's just in the northeast, extreme northeast corner of Egypt. Mark, did you get the name? Adonijah was the one who thought he was going to be king. He took him there that he might not reign in Jerusalem, and he imposed on the land a fine of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. From what I've been able to read, you don't just reach in your pocket and pull out a talent of gold or 100 of silver. It put a great cramp on the land to raise that kind of money. Notice, though, that Necho is the one that did this. So the way that the histories read is that Necho beat Josiah's army, passed through, fought the battle that he was going to fight against the Babylonians, and on his way back, he unseated the one that was king. How he knew that that guy was pro-Israel or anti-Israel at that time is not revealed to us here. But if you do what he's going to do next, you would think you've got an ally in the palace in Jerusalem. Let's go to Jeremiah 22. We'll finish up what little we know about Jehoahaz. Starts in verse 10. And this is Jeremiah talking about Shallum, we see in verse 11. Jeremiah 22:10, do not weep for the dead or mourn for him, but weep continually for the one who goes away, for he will never return or see his native land. Thus says the Lord regarding Shallum, the son of Josiah, the king of Judah, who became king in the place of Josiah. That's how we know that the two are the same people. His father, who went forth from this place, he will never return there. But in the place where they led him captive, there he will die and not see this land again. And as far as we can tell from the biblical record, and from as far as I can tell from the historical record, that's exactly what happened to him. He was taken captive by the Egyptian Pharaoh. and he was taken into Egypt and was never heard from again. Questions, thoughts, comments? Yes?
Just to backtrack a little bit, Megiddo reference, that's where we get the term Armageddon.
Armageddon, yes.
The Valley of Megiddo was the site of several key battles in the history of Israel, so it's used figuratively in the Revelation to symbolize a monumental battle, if you will, between the forces of good.
Yeah, I remembered that, but I didn't go look it up to see what other battles are recorded there, either in the Bible or in secular history. But yeah, if it's where I think it is, it's not too far from the sea. It's kind of flat and easy to march an army through. Any other thoughts on Jehoahaz? A little louder.
Is this a good example of God using a foreigner or someone not godly to accomplish his will?
The question was, is this an example of God using someone who is foreign or not godly to accomplish his will? It certainly was the will of the Lord that Jehoahaz was about to be taken captive and not come back. So, and as the writer of Kings says, he was evil, so they got rid of him. Yes, Todd.
It kind of seems like at the end of the northern kingdom, and then now at the end of the southern kingdom, you see the Lord's potential involvement more and more in the activities that take place, because it involves people that otherwise would have no reason to be involved, except they just chosen it.
Right.
It may be the accelerated process of kingdoms coming to an end and God being involved in those processes.
Well, and especially when we look forward a week or two, Nebuchadnezzar was certainly the instrument of God to carry out his purpose. Other thoughts? Well, we're not going to get as far now as I thought, but that's okay with me. We're going to move then to the next king. In the chronicle that we read, Jehoiakim is called Jehoiakim. But if you look at verse 34 of 2 Kings 23, back to that reading, Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in the place of Josiah, his father, and changed his name to Jehoiakim. But he took Jehoahaz away and brought him to Egypt, and he died there, just as Jeremiah said was going to happen. Renaming somebody. If you've got marginal notes, it will tell you that the Eliakim was God has established, and Jehoiakim was Yahweh has established. You can tell the similarity toward the end of the names. The speculation was that Necho may have wanted to show the people of the land that what he had done was sanctioned by the God of their land. You remember the Egyptians and others thought there were particular gods for particular regions. They didn't have a concept of a universal God. The Egyptians had their gods, the Babylonians had theirs, the Assyrians had theirs. And changing the name also slightly may have been his way of calming, to the extent that people got too upset about losing Jehoahaz. They couldn't have been too attached to him. He'd only been there 3 months. But, and then Jehoiakim gave the silver and gold to the Pharaoh, but he taxed the land in order to get that money. He was under the thumb of Necho, at least to start. Necho put him in what he probably thought was his birthright position to begin with, that is, king. He was the oldest son that we know of. Butch and I don't know about what happened to Johanan. We just don't know. But the oldest one that we know about got passed over. I could see very easily Jehoiakim or some of his allies making entreaty to the king and saying, hey, you put the oldest son on the throne there and he'll serve you. and he'll pay this fine that you're putting on the land. He'll take care of you. And he did. To give it to Pharaoh Necho. You got to know that went over real big with the people. But what were they going to do? Jehoiakim presumably had access to the army of the Egyptians in order to enforce whatever orders he was making. Not a great situation for Israel at that point. Jehoiakim, I didn't say earlier, Jehoahaz, near as I can tell, took the throne for 3 months in 609 BC. During the same calendar year, his brother took the throne and was there from 609 to 598. Now here's some things that we don't know. Well, we might know. No, not from the Bible. At least I got it somewhere. It may be in here somewhere, but I got it elsewhere. Jehoiakim continued to serve Necho for 4 years. In fact, we do get that. That's in Chronicles. I know it's in the Bible somewhere. What's that? 24:1 was that? He became his servant for 3 years. Yeah, but it doesn't tell us doesn't tell us how long. What happened was that the Babylonians and the Egyptians went to battle again. And in 605, 4 years after Jehoiakim was installed on the throne, Babylon beat Egypt. And it took captives and tribute from Judah at that point. So then for 4 years, he then served Nebuchadnezzar. And then he rebelled against him. But what we're not told, and Linda mentioned 24:1, 2 Kings 24:1, in the days Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years, and then he turned and rebelled against him. What's not here is what happened after those 3 years. The Egyptian king, or the Egypt and Babylon, had a rematch, but it was on Egypt's home turf. Babylon apparently had used part of Judah as a staging area and invaded, and it didn't go well for Babylon. There was heavy losses on both sides, but the historical supposition is that while Jehoiakim saw that Babylon was not winning, he thought, I don't have to obey that guy anymore, and he rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. Now, what we know about Nebuchadnezzar is he doesn't take stuff like that lightly. The Lord, verse 2 of 2 Kings 24 says, he sent bands of Chaldeans, Armenians, Moabites, Ammonites, sent them to Judah to destroy it. All of these were presumably under Babylonian control, against, according to the word of the Lord, which he had spoken through his servant, the prophets. Let's go to Chronicles 36 for a minute. Chronicles 36, and starting around Second Chronicles, starting in verse 5, tells us that Jehoiakim was 25 and he became king and reigned 11 years. We've already seen that he started out being a vassal of Egypt, and then he switched sides to Babylon, and then he rebelled against Babylon, presumably to take sides with Egypt. And verse 6 of chapter 36 says, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against him and bound him with bronze chains to take him to Babylon. But we know he didn't go to Babylon. So if you read this closely, and again, I'm interjecting some of the history I've read into this, he chained him, put him in the stockade, so to speak, and then cut a deal with him where he would serve him again. He would be back on his side, and he did not take him away. We know this just from simple logic. Jehoiakim Jehoiakim, when he died, his son became king for 3 months. If Jehoiakim had already been in the possession, the captivity of Nebuchadnezzar at that point, there would not have been the opportunity for anyone to name a king. Nebuchadnezzar would have been doing it, as we will see next week when we look at Zedekiah. We did not get to, and we will, the references in Jeremiah that shows what Jehoiakim's attitude was toward God's word, toward his prophets, and what God's attitude was toward Jehoiakim and the nation of Judah. If any of you want to read in Jeremiah before next week, here are some of the places that we will probably stop. And then I'm going to tell you something about Jeremiah. Jeremiah 26, in this order, 26, 25, 7, 36, and 22. That's 26, 25, 7, 36, and 22. The book of Jeremiah can be confusing because chapter 26 says it was written, or it addresses something in the first days of Jehoiakim. Chapter 25 says it's year 4 of Jehoiakim. And there's one where you read something about Zedekiah, who's the last king, that's out of place. And that's why I'm not going to be doing all of the references to Jehoiakim. I'm just going to give you the highlights of how he reacted and then how God reacted to him. So we will be looking at the end of Jehoiakim next week. Then we'll look at Jeconiah, also known as Jehoiachin, and then we will probably start on Zedekiah. We got a minute or two before the last bell. Any other thoughts, questions, or comments?
That passage we looked at in Jeremiah that talked about, and you surmised that the people were all in on, not all in, they just go along with Josiah. I think it's about verse 11 says, in the New King James, it says half-hearted.
Half-heartedly, exactly.
Yeah, they just went along with it.
And we see that throughout history. Think about when Constantine was the emperor and he converted to Christianity in like 323 or whatever it was. It suddenly became politically expedient for people who were pagans to become at least half-hearted Christians. And a lot of their practices crept into the churches, and then the Roman government organization crept into the churches and is still in some. Okay, we'll meet again.